Welcome back everyone. Hi, if you're new, I'm Tori, and today I want to do a little spin on the if you liked this, read this kind of recommendations video. And instead, I want to talk about books that I did not really enjoy and then recommend you books that I think you should read instead. I think this could be fun for a couple of different reasons. Like, let's say you don't like the book that I'm actually recommending, you could try the book that I didn't like and you might get on with that a little bit better. Kind of a little bit of a reverse recommendations video, I guess, but I think this is going to be a great video. I do hope you enjoy it, and let's get into it. First book I want to talk about is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire, and this is book 1 in the Wayward Children series. I did not enjoy this book, unfortunately. This is a fantasy novella. It has a really great premise. We are following characters who, when they were children, they went to these fantastical places, they had these magical experiences, and so now that these kids are back in our normal world, they don't really know how to cope with the experiences that they've had, and so now there's a safe place where they can be and they can learn and live together and kind of share the experiences that they've had. As the novella goes on, things start getting a lot darker, and this school is not as safe as they once thought it was. Again, I thought this was a great premise, but just the execution lost me along the way. And I also feel like some of the themes in this book were just a little bit too heavy-handed. They seemed kind of forced in some situations. And overall, I just wasn't a fan of the characters that we were following in this book. So if you are also like me and you did not enjoy Every Heart a Doorway, then you should try Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I love Neverwhere so much, and even though this book is relatively popular, I feel like in the grand scheme of Neil Gaiman's other books, like when it comes to American Gods, Stardust even, and Coraline especially, I love Coraline, but I feel like in comparison to those other books, we're not talking about Neverwhere as much, and we definitely should be. This is a dark fantasy story, and I think if you liked the concept of Every Heart a Doorway and this idea that, people can travel to these different worlds and then they end up back in our world and don't really know how to cope with that, I think if you like that but didn't get along with the novella as a whole, I think Neverwhere could work perfectly for you. In this, we're following our main character, Richard, and this takes place in London, and he is with his fiance when they stumble upon this young woman, Dor, who is severely injured and bleeding out on the sidewalk. And so Richard, he takes it upon himself to help her, and in doing so, he gets wrapped up into all of her problems and realizes that she has been trying to evade these two people who have been after her in a different version of London. And so Richard, he becomes immersed in this dark world of the London below and moving through all of these really interesting and creepy environments and atmospheres. And I loved it. I love the journey of this, and I love Neil Gaiman as a writer anyway. So I think this is one of his best, and I highly recommend Neverwhere if you have not read this already. The next book that I was not a fan of was Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. So even though I did not enjoy Horror Store, it didn't put me off from Grady Hendrix at all. I still want to read more by this author. The next one I think I'm going to pick up is going to be My Best Friend's Exorcism. So that's somewhere down the line on the TBR, but I'm still very interested in his work. But just Horror Store overall didn't really do it for me. I think, again, this is a great example of just a really interesting premise, a great structure, and just visually, I loved that aspect of the story. But the story itself was not the greatest for me. This takes place in a big box furniture store, Ikea pretty much, and a lot of weird, strange things have been happening in the store at night, and so we're following these severely underpaid employees who stay behind in the store overnight in order to figure out what exactly is going on. And throughout the story, we're getting information in pictures about all of these different pieces of furniture in the store and just how the store is changing over the course of the night. It's very adventurous, and the more like kind of creepy horror elements start to kick in as the story goes on, but just as a book didn't really work for me. If you did not enjoy Horror Store, I think this recommendation is very obvious, but if you didn't enjoy it, you need to read Fina by Nino Cipri. This was so good. This is a sci-fi novella, and I feel like Nino Cipri and Fina, they take all of the really interesting themes that I was enjoying about Horror Store and just blows it up and just turns it into this incredibly adventurous and heartfelt and funny story, and it was so good. We're following a couple of main characters, and they work in this furniture store that is similar to an Ikea. This elderly woman, she goes missing in the store, and it becomes up to our two main characters to use this device called the Fina that will allow them to navigate through these different multiverses in search of this elderly woman. It is so good. Again, it is so adventurous. And also I think Nino Cipri's commentary about corporate world, corporate culture and how we treat employees is so spot on, and I think so timely. So I love this, and I think it is a great kind of counter book to something like Horror Store. The next book I want to talk about that I do not like, I feel like a lot of you know that I do not like this book. That's The Martian by Andy Weir. I feel like to this day, The Martian remains like one of my most unpopular sci-fi opinions. I do not like this book. I did not like it when I finished it. The book has not grown on me over time. I am not a fan of The Martian. If you're unfamiliar with this book, this is a sci-fi novel, and we have our main character who is on this mission on Mars with his crew. Something happens, the crew evacuates, and they think that our main character is dead, and so they leave and he's still on Mars stranded. And so the entire book he is trying to survive on Mars by himself while people on Earth are working to try to get him back home. The concept is great, but there is just something about Andy Weir's writing that I don't get on with all the time. I don't really like how he tries to balance these serious plot lines with this kind of corny humor, so it doesn't work for me, unfortunately. That being said though, I think this recommendation for a book I did actually enjoy is going to surprise you. If you did not like The Martian and you're like, oh, I think I'm done with Andy Weir, it's not for me, I recommend you give Project Hail Mary a try. I was skeptical, and I will say I don't love Project Hail Mary, but I liked it. I thought it was a solid read. I did enjoy it. To come from completely disliking The Martian to actually enjoying reading Project Hail Mary was a pretty big leap for me and Andy Weir. So that already is, I think, a good reason to try to pick up this book. I think what really worked for me in Project Hail Mary is that the stakes were like almost the reverse of what they were in The Martian. So like in The Martian, I've said this before, you have this one man trying to survive and you have everybody on Earth trying to save one person, or the scientists on Earth trying to save one person. But in Project Hail Mary, you have this almost same premise, this man stranded in space, but instead he is trying to save all of humanity. And I think for me, those stakes just felt a little more compelling to read about. And also what really made me enjoy this book was there is a character that comes into play a little bit into the story that I thought was incredible. I love the relationship that our main character develops with this new one. And also what I liked in Project Hail Mary was the perspective of the scientists who are still on Earth, you know, in flashbacks, trying to prepare for this mission and what was at stake. So I love that aspect of the story. I enjoyed this new character that was introduced. So if you are skeptical about continuing on with Andy Weir, I say give Project Hail Mary a chance because it worked for me. Didn't love it, but it worked for me. The next book I want to talk about that I did not like was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This didn't work for me at all. This is a mystery. Yeah, this is a mystery novel with a time loop structure to it. And for me, the time loop itself was fine, but I think for me, the actual mystery of what was going on just felt very convoluted. And to put a time loop structure on top of a mystery that I felt like already wasn't that well fleshed out just didn't work for me overall. But in this, we have a character, Evelyn Hardcastle, who's the daughter of these individuals who are throwing this very lavish party. And Evelyn Hardcastle is going to be murdered at this party. Well, she is murdered at the party, and it becomes up to our main character to figure out basically who is behind her death. He's able to like body hop between these key guests at this party in order to relive their day and see their connections to Evelyn and see what their motivations were basically. I did not enjoy this at all. Again, I thought the mystery was convoluted. The characters felt more like caricatures and just felt very flat for me overall. But if you also didn't enjoy this book, but you like time loops and you like that kind of structure of a story, I highly, highly recommend you go read Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. That time loop structure is the only similarity between those two books. But in this, I just think it is done perfectly. Marisha Pessl is the author of one of my favorite books of all time, Night Film, and she struck gold again with Neverworld Wake. I thought this was amazing. We are following our main character, Beatrice, and she was part of this friend group along with her boyfriend. They were all very close, but then her boyfriend died. And so the book takes place during the summer, and Beatrice, she goes back to this house where they all used to spend their time together in order to find out what really happened to her boyfriend and also get some closure from this friend group to distance herself before she goes off to college. But that night, something completely unexpected happens, and this book takes one of the wildest turns, and our characters, they have to make some drastic decisions in order to survive. This was amazing. I think the less you know about this book going into it, the better. Just let the story unfold. But if you love a good time loop, if you love a good mystery, this is great. Please go read this. The next book I want to talk about is The Word Exchange by Elena Graydon. This was one of the worst books that I read in whatever year that was that I read it. Oh my God, I thought this was so boring. It didn't go anywhere. It was one of the driest things I think I've read in a long time. I love when language is used as a major plot element in science fiction, dystopian. So I thought The Word Exchange was going to be just the perfect read. And it was anything but the perfect read. Oh my God. So this is more dystopian than anything. And it takes place in this world where basically print is non-existent. Like books, newspapers, libraries, none of that is really a thing anymore. And instead, the people, they have these devices that they use in order to communicate and get all of their information. Everybody is very attached to this device. But our main character, she is part of this organization that is dedicated to creating the last dictionary, and they're working on the last dictionary. But then her father goes missing, and her father was kind of the lead person on this project, and it just spirals from there. So I think some of you might know where this next recommendation is going, but if you're new here, this next book I want to recommend is one of my favorite books of all time. If you like language, if you like twisty narratives, if just great stories, you need to read Lexicon by Max Berry. This is one of the best books I've ever read. I think this book is perfection, in my humble opinion. I haven't talked about Lexicon in so long, so just give me a second while I get excited all over again. In this, we have two storylines happening at the same time, but the main one I'm not gonna get into the second one because it's kind of infused into the main one, and it could be a spoiler. We are following our main character, Emily, and she has just done everything she can to survive. She's been getting by on the streets. She's like a little card shark, and she knows how to take care of herself out in the streets. But one day she is approached by these representatives from this exclusive school out in Virginia, and she accepts their offer to get into this school. And at this school, they are learning how to use language as a literal weapon. And by the time they graduate, they take on the monikers of these dead poets. That is all I'm going to say about this book. But don't forget that other storyline that I mentioned is still in play too. And that storyline is more like, it has more of a thriller aspect to it, thriller mystery. This book is so good. I will never, ever stop recommending Lexicon. I know I haven't talked about it in a while, but it was time for it to come back up. Lexicon is truly the kind of book where I have not read anything else like it. Nothing even remotely similar has ever touched this book and has been good. Let me clarify that. Touched this book and has been good. I thought The Word Exchange was gonna be that. I was hoping it would be that because I'm just oh, I need more Lexicon. Nothing can touch Lexicon. And then the last book that I want to mention that I did not like at all was To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. This was one of my least favorite books of 2021. And it's a book that I still get a little upset about when I think about it because it was just so bloated. It's so long, it's so uninteresting. The characters for me are not memorable at all in this book. I didn't enjoy To Sleep in a Sea of Stars at all. And quite honestly, in terms of recommendations, literally read anything else. If you're looking for scope, start The Expanse. If you liked the AI, read Becky Chambers' First Contact, read The Last Astronaut by David Wellington, The Action, read Velocity Weapon. Do anything else with your time. So that is it for me, you guys. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these books, or if you are not a fan of some of the books I recommended and instead prefer the book that I don't like. I want to hear about it. I think that could make for some really fun conversation down in the comments. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.